All right, thank you for staying with the Monday Report. Town Hall session begins right now. We're talking about the CBC. What are your thoughts on CBC? At Trevor Mbidi at Citizen TV Kenya, use the hashtag Monday Report. We're seeing quite a number of them. You can also send in your videos on WhatsApp on 0742961341. With me in studio is Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, Executive Director of Sawa Agenda. Kennedy Echesa, Advocate of the High Court and Educational Law Expert, who was joining us from Kakamega, but there seems to be some network challenges there, so we'll be speaking to him on phone in this regard. But there's quite a lot of feedback that has come through because the CBC task force is taking views from Kenyans for the next 11 days, and then they'll do a preliminary report, which will reveal what really are the people saying. That is the conversation we are posing to you right now. What are your thoughts on CBC? Shall we start with the videos of what you've said so far? Let's listen to what some of you have said so far.
CBC is a good thing, and each and every parent should try to embrace it, since it's more of creativity and it can actually lead to self-employment.
CBC is a good system, but I think it's there in the wrong timing. First of all, we need to tell the people the defects of the 844 system first, and then implement the CBC system. And first, the question we need to ask those pushing it to be implemented: are their children going through the system, the CBC system?
How feasible and how workable is it for the government to sustainably fund CBC, not only in the present time, but even in the near future, if it's unable to fund public universities, which has been merely in existence from ages? How possible is it to look into the funding of CBC from the start to the end?
All right, and let's start with the Echesa on this. Echesa, what are your views on CBC? Is this the right time to implement CBC? Is it wrong? What are your thoughts on this?
Trevor, thank you, and my apologies for not using the video link because it's raining heavily in my home village and the network is unstable. At the end, my position has always been that CBC is a very good curriculum, because it is a practical curriculum that offers practical solutions in the pastoral education. The country, we prepare. We do not have sufficient resources to implement this curriculum, and we are trying to hurry, and in the end, we shall advantage over 80% of school-going children, a majority of whom are from very poor backgrounds. However, we are headed to a very interesting time in the next 2 months. Currently, grade classes are graded, are being assessed, and they are supposed to join junior secondary. They are supposed to join junior secondary. They have chosen the institutions of choice, but what remains to be seen is whether these 12-year-old girls and boys will be proceeding to boarding schools at age 1 and 2, which specific schools, and 3, are those specific secondary schools ready to receive them? Should they receive them? Are they sufficiently equipped to teach them? What is the level of the teacher preparedness of transition? I think the task force should address the idea and the issue of admission with some urgency, because in the next 2 months, we have a whole grade called grade 6, which is transit to an academic environment that is strange to the government, that is unknown to the teachers, that is practical in our society. So the question whether we are ready to implement CBC, the response shall remain no, we are not ready to implement it.
Okay. Let me bring in Dr. Emmanuel on this. Just to set the stage and the record for this, many people have been comparing 844 and CBC. What is the difference from your perspective?
Thank you, Trevor, for having me. First, we cannot compare CBC with 844. 844 is a system, CBC is a curriculum. It is possible to still implement CBC in 844. What we are supposed to be comparing is the CBC vis-a-vis the outcome-based curriculum that we have been implementing in the 844 system.
Yeah.
Now, what is the difference between these two? In the outcome-based curriculum, you decide as a society what you want your education system to achieve are the outcomes. And then you try to get every learner to achieve those outcomes. And that is what we have been doing for a very long time. The consequence of that is that those learners who don't achieve those outcomes are graded failures. And I like the gentleman who said we should explain to people what 844 has done before we say we want to implement the CBC. It has wasted a lot of children. Wasted them in the sense that because we have said you must achieve this level, and if you don't achieve, you are a failure, we have every year produced lots of failures. In March this year, 379,000 students out of the 826,000 who sat exams scored mini grade D and below. 379,000. Those are wasted because they do not have post-primary, post-secondary training opportunities. If they have to go to any college, they are going to learn artisan courses, which they could have learned after class 8. They had already qualified for after class 8. That is the outcome-based curriculum that we are implementing. In the competency-based curriculum, you actually say, these are the outcomes we want our education system to achieve. And then recognize that every learner has their own path towards that. And therefore support the learners to follow these separate paths towards attainment of the overall national goals of education. That's why you have had the term learner-centered, that the CBC focuses on what the learner will be able to do at the end of their years in the school system. And there will be no categorization of failures and those who have passed. Meaning that every learner will find something that they learn in school that they can be able to utilize post-school. And I think that is the key difference between the competency-based curriculum. I've had people talk about how competency-based is a practical course. It's not. We are not taking children to polytechnics from grade 1. They're going to learn English, they're going to learn math, they're going to learn the sciences. They are not being taught skills. They're just going to learn, except that we are asking them to achieve the competencies they can be able to attain in each of the courses they are going to learn.
But where then is the confusion? Is it in the implementation? Because there are some parents who are saying their students who are going through CBC still have to do exams. Was that the intended purpose initially?
Examinations, it's always a way of evaluating progress. The emphasis in the design of this curriculum is that we focus most on formative evaluation. Evaluation for learning. So that children go to school and at certain milestones, you evaluate to check whether they are attaining the competencies desired of that level. And the purpose for that is to enable the teacher to start to make remedy if they realize some of the learners are falling behind the desired milestones, which is the opposite of what we have been used to, where learners go to school and learn for exam. And they end up with a summative evaluation that categorizes those who have passed and those who have failed. And we say in the competency-based curriculum that that is not very meaningful evaluation, because evaluation is supposed to be one that provides feedback to enable the teacher to continue to improve in how they facilitate this learning to happen. So that there is no learner staying in school for 8 years and then you're told you've scored 100 marks in KCPE, no further progress for you, or you have reached Form 4, you have scored an E like the 46,000 who scored E in March. And you're told, okay, this is the end of the road for you. But
Dr. Manyasa, parents are simply saying it is too expensive. I mean, even Echesa spoke about it when he said that majority of children come from poor backgrounds. But I was also speaking to my editor earlier on, and he mentioned that they've been asked to print pictures that depict patriotism. what if the child in the village who doesn't have any access to a printer, doesn't even know what that is? The parents themselves don't even have the capacity.
From where I sit,
Yeah.
there are several problems associated with the implementation. One of those problems being that there hasn't been adequate preparation of teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is inadequate preparation of teachers, there is sometimes inappropriate interpretation of the designs of the curriculum. And so a teacher ends up making a wild claim or demand on the parent, mostly because they have misunderstood the design.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not their problem. They haven't been properly trained, because that is one of the places where we failed miserably in terms of training teachers on the new curriculum. So that is something that needs to be remedied.
Yeah.
So that there is proper interpretation of the curriculum designs, and therefore proper demands being put on the parents. But also a bigger problem that we created in the implementation was to rush the implementation before we had done a costed implementation plan that will be able to allocate the cost. Because what a costed implementation plan was supposed to do was to say, we need so much to educate a child from PP1 to university.
Yeah.
This money is required at these intervals along this path. And government is able to put in this much. Development partners, because they are funding this education heavily, are able to put in this much. The balance is this much which the parent needs to put in. What do we do with the children whose parents cannot be able to put in the gap? Then look at the available bursary system and other private actors to be able to support the children whose parents cannot put in the balance that will be missing. Because we missed that important step, you hear all these stories. It is too expensive. I'll respond to that by saying,
Yeah.
if we think 844 is cheap, we need to sit down and ask ourselves, what is the overall value that it adds to this society by wasting 50% of the children who go through it?
Mm.
Because I mentioned to you 379. If we look at the number that scored D+ and below in the last KCSE, there are 490-something thousand out of 826. That is more than 50% of the children who went through this system scored D+ and below.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they go?
Yeah.
Where do we send them every year? And what is the burden of all these children whom we have taken to school frustrated and ejected out of the school system?
Yeah.
What is their burden on our society? And is that cheap?
Okay, let me bring back Kennedy Echesa on this. Echesa, what do you recommend going forward? The task force is now taking views from the parents, but this is something that has already been rolled out. In fact, there's a transition coming through next year. What do you recommend going forward?
I want to comment briefly on what Professor has stated.
Yes.
And say that in this country, we all agree that CBC is a good curriculum. In fact, the conversation is not and should not be on the efficacy of CBC and its effectiveness as a curriculum. It is beyond doubt that it is a very good curriculum that is supposed to be implemented in societies such as ours. What we are debating on is whether it can be practically implemented to benefit the society as it is intended. And we've said it cannot be. CBC, the task force, is moving around counties collecting views. And my preliminary conclusion is that they have taken the wrong approach. Trevor, you cannot be moving in county headquarters calling very, very, very senior stakeholders. Those are the county commissioners, the TSC directors, Ministry of Education directors. You are calling the top Kuppet officials. These are just small dynasties within villages. When they converge, their reasoning is high-level reasoning to understand the problems bedeviling CBC, the task force ought to have moved to the ground. Let us have this conversation in Habondi Primary School, in Haunga Primary School, where they will get the real parent who struggles with the cost of this education. But what they're going to get from the so-called town hall county meeting of the stakeholders are the same things that Kenyans have been talking about, the divided opinion. But if they went to the common parent in the schools, how many schools have they visited in the villages in Turkana, in Kajiado, in Narok, in Mumias, to ascertain, talking about CBC classes? CBC classes is a misnomer. There are no such classes. What we have are just few structures, 2 or 3 additional classrooms that have already been occupied. For instance, Trevor, you go to Butere Girls National School. It was given about 3 CBC classrooms. 2 are complete, and the 2 are already occupied, and the school is yet to receive the CBC learners. The task force in the remaining 10 days should move away from the high-level stakeholder engagement in the counties and go engage Makoha, go engage Otaba, the common man on the ground who will give us the real test of CBC. Remember, one of the problems we have as a nation is that this curriculum has been, for the past 2 or 3 or 4 years, been implemented from Jogo House. The technocrats at Jogo House trying to imagine that everything is well, everything is okay, when the common parent and the common learner in the village is suffering. And the way forward, going forward, we must get an immediate intervention to ensure that we will not lose out on a population.
And what is that immediate intervention?
For instance, the government must hold the so-called transition to grade 7. We ought to maintain these learners where they are learning in class 7 and class 8 as we give it another trial whether these curriculum can be implemented in the next 2 years. So, maintain the learners in the primary schools where they are. Let them not move to the so-called junior secondary schools. In fact, just extend the 6th part of CBC should now be 8. And we embark on giving our schools adequate infrastructure, training more teachers, training teachers already in practice and in employment, and making them own this particular curriculum. However, we cannot have a transition in January. It is practically impossible, whether we force it or not. The task force should be bold enough to say the transition is impossible. Let us maintain our learners where they are, primary schools where they are.
Okay.
Let us embark now on the process of implementation of this curriculum through sufficient funding. And very lastly, Trevor, Professor has made an allegation that 844 has been wasting some learners. It has not. It is because the society has transformed itself into reasoning that universities are everything. Students who get less than 200 marks in KCPE actually ought to join youth polytechnics in their villages. Those who do not do very well academically in secondary ought to join technical training institutions. Those perhaps who have excelled very well ought to join universities. And we have a provision that even those joining youth polytechnics after class 8 can advance their studies in craftsmanship to the highest level possible. What we lack is awareness on where one should go after failing to achieve this at this particular stage. 844 has no problem. We have the problem with the leadership and the direction that the government gives in its implementation.
All right. And, Dr. Manyasa, there's a lot that has come out.
I generally don't make allegations. From where I sit, I endeavor to speak from a point of fact.
Yeah.
And let me make this clear. The system we are in now has wasted learners. Away from those who scored D's and E's, there are lots of people who scored A's in all their arts and never made it to university, never made it to a good college because they have failed the sciences that they did not need in the first place. If you have scored your straight A's in arts, you can study law. You don't need to pass biology to go and study law. But a lot of people have had their doors closed. We have had people who scored S in sciences, and they could be doctors, they could have been engineers, and they have not proceeded to higher education because you have failed CRE, which you don't need to go and study medicine or to go and study engineering. So this system has been wasteful. That is not in contest. I am sure about that. But besides that, it is not impossible to have a transition in January, because we can say, let's keep all these children in primary. That's fine, and teach them what? Because they have been taught a new curriculum that has a different set of content up to grade 6. If we keep them in primary now, do we teach them class 7 outcome-based curriculum, or do we teach them grade 7 CBC content, which most primary school teachers, as we speak, cannot teach? So what will we teach them when we keep them in that primary school? Kenya has a big problem of looking for easy ways out. Unfortunately, on this one, we rushed into it. We do not have an easy way out of it. We must find a solution to the problems that are coming with this system and make sure that this system works. And for me, from where we sit, the mistakes that were actually made for a very long time were the thoughts that we kept on entertaining that we will go back. From as early as 2020, there were people entertaining thoughts that we will do away with CBC. What that did to the country is that the country failed to prepare for subsequent steps, because a lot of people held in their heads this notion that we'll go back. We shouldn't entertain that kind of thought now. It's too late in the day, because we are just making people who are supposed to be thinking out and making sure solutions are available also waste time entertaining a thought that is not going to be happening. So can we focus on finding a way through which these children will transition? And for me, government has a certain number of things that it should do.
Yeah.
One of the things that is a problem right now is that there are no teachers prepared to teach junior secondary. The teachers in primary school, most of them do not have the content competency to teach grade 7, 8, and 9. And this is not in any way disrespecting those teachers, because I have been told by teachers in person that they are struggling with science content in grade 6. So if a teacher is struggling with the grade 6 science content, he or she will not be able to teach the grade 7, 8, and 9 science content. So that is a reality that we have to face. The second reality is that the secondary school teachers are themselves also not prepared to teach something called integrated science, because integrated science has all the 3 sciences, and our secondary school teachers are trained to teach 2 sciences, to teach 2 subjects. So either they have biology, chemistry, they have biology, physics, or they have chemistry, physics.
But
there's no one with a combination. So right now, to me, from where I sit, and the government has offered to hire 58,000 teachers, they should hire them right now, specifically for junior secondary, and start to train them between now and January 23rd, when schools are going to reopen. There is sufficient window to train these teachers on content, so that by 23rd January, we have teachers, a cohort of teachers, specifically trained to teach junior secondary. Once that is done, for me, that is the most critical thing, to get the teachers trained for that. Once that is done, we have our sub-county schools. They always admit 60-something% of all the learners who join secondary school. We can take these learners, all of them, to those sub-county schools. What that will do is it will eliminate 2 things. One, it will eliminate the placement nightmare that will likely arise if we were to try and take them, admit them the way we usually admit others. But 2, it can afford us to save the money we want to spend on CAPC exam for grade 6, so that they don't sit any exam. They simply get placed in the nearest sub-county school. We can keep those who are attending private schools and whose parents will be able to keep them there, and most private primary schools have set up a secondary,
Yeah.
junior secondary wing, we can allow those to be kept there. There are about 400,000 of them in those schools. If 300,000 remained there, we have 9,000 and something public secondary schools, with about 6,400 being sub-county. This 6,400 being sub-county plus another about 1,500 private secondary schools. With proper planning between now and support from government, they can prepare to admit the junior secondary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Echesa, when you say that this transition should be delayed, what will that achieve? Because Dr. Manyasa is giving very practical examples of how it can be sorted out going forward.
Let me tell you, Trevor, and with profound respect, the solution
Let's get the sound
carry,
for Echesa in the studio for a bit.
You're getting
Yeah,
me?
say that again.
I'm saying the solutions that Dr. Manyasa is giving, in my opinion, are impractical for the following reasons. One, we do not have time to train any teacher between now and February. Trevor, at the end of this month, in the next 3 weeks, there shall be a national examination called KCSE. 70% of secondary school teachers have been called upon by NEC, as has always been the practice, to go and supervise this examination for 1 month. After that month, 70 or 80% of teachers will travel to Nairobi and other destinations for the marking of this exam. That will take place from the 2nd of January to about 25th of January, when schools are expected to reopen for the term 1 of the next academic year. Teachers will not even have single 2 or 3 weeks of rest. Where will we get time to train these particular teachers? Same will apply to KCPE. This exam requires to be supervised. The exam requires to be marked. And again, the issue of learners being retained in the sub-county or the county school is subject to discussion. This is very discriminatory. Trevor, your clansmen and girls in your village have been struggling to work hard every morning with the hope that after transition, they will leave a village in Kisii and join Alliance High School and join Mangu High School. You are now forcing them to cross over the fence and join the school that is next to them. We are going to demoralize our young boys and young girls who've been working hard to join the so-called prestigious schools. It is a fact that in this country, national schools, properly so-called, are discriminatively distributed. Where is Alliance Girls located? Where is Alliance Boys? Mangu, Precious Blood, Nairobi School. They're in a radius of about 10 kilometers or so. Where are you living other regions like Northern Kenya, like Turkana, like Western, that do not have proper national schools or national schools properly so called? Let us forget about these county, one boys and one girls school that the government designated to be national schools, yet they have nothing to show for being national. They're just national on paper, but they are very local in their very existence. So we can't move these learners from classic to this Kaunga Primary, for example, to Kaunga Secondary. A student who is very bright, a student who is very ambitious. So those solutions to me are not very practical, are discriminatory, and they'll create a bigger problem than what we have now.
All right, Dr. Manyasa.
Echesa, I would wish that you listen before we engage. I said we let all the learners in CBC transition to sub-county schools. I was very specific. There is no land that is a sub-county in Kiambu. And the reason we have to do that is to start to transition to a system where we have junior schools and senior schools. Because eventually that has to happen if we implement CBC. Because senior school is going to require different facilities, is going to require that we recategorize those senior schools into the 3 pathways. So my proposal right now is that we start to make sub-county schools junior schools, and sub-county schools in Kakamega, in Kiambu, in Turkana, a sub-county school is a sub-county school. I hope that you get me clear on that.
I get you clear,
am in no way. I am in no way saying that let the child who lives next to Alliance go to Alliance and the other who wanted to come to Alliance be stopped. I'm saying CAPC children, CBC children, go to sub-county schools so that going forward, those sub-county schools are going to be the junior school. And the county, extra-county, and national schools are going to be senior school where every other child will go based on the pathway that they take and how that school is recategorized.
Okay. There are quite a number of tweets coming through. Echesa, are you still there? Yeah.
Just one. Professors should know that the most disadvantaged schools in this country are the so-called sub-county schools. These are the schools that everybody else has neglected other than the CDF, which gives them a classroom after 2 years. Those are the schools that are heavily strained in terms of infrastructure. When you go to Musingu High School in Ikolomani, it has almost everything in terms of structure. The neighboring school called Our Lady Queen of Peace Chikondi Girls, which is a sub-county school, has no structure. Students have nowhere to go. So why should we be adding problems where there are sufficient problems to deal with? And then Professor has not told us what Musingu High School and the so-called county and extra-county schools and national schools shall be doing in the transition period now that they will not receive learners for 2 years. When sub-county schools are receiving these learners, what are the national schools receiving?
What then does delaying these learners help us with, the proposal you had earlier on?
The proposal I had earlier on is that by delaying these learners, we do not disrupt any academic calendar. We do not disrupt our structure. We do not suffer the issue of strained infrastructure. Let these learners remain where they are. We call them grade 7. We can have a discussion on the content of grade 7 and how to teach that grade 7. And my good brother has admitted that even now teachers do not know the content they are teaching, which in other statement has said that there is no CBC being taught in our primary schools. What is being taught is an average of CBC and 844.
So how different will that be from the outcome-based curriculum that we have? Because there are those who've been trained through the CBC program.
And the number is very minimum. So we'll have to make a decision as a country whether to save the 10% that have benefited from the so-called CBC or whether to save the 80 to 85% that have been taken through 844 in the name of CBC.
Those numbers are
now let me try and maybe speak slowly so I can make sense.
I'm a fast learner, Professor.
I would please.
Okay.
I don't interrupt you when you're speaking, so do not interrupt me. And I am not a professor. I am not one of those who claim titles that don't belong to them. I am not a professor yet. I am not. That is a rank conferred by a university, and none has given me that, so I wouldn't claim. But what I have said, and I wish you could listen to me before you engage, is that we have sub-county schools. It's true that they have less infrastructure and less teachers compared to the national and extra-county schools. But remember, they are the ones currently educating those children you have said who would be discriminated, the children of the poor. 65% of the 844 class 8 leavers go to sub-county schools. So even if we now want to say let us remain there, we are still not helping those poor you seem to be defending. That is one point. Because they are still educating 65% of the children who leave class 8. The second point that I made, and I need it to be very clear, I am saying that we put the children from CBC in sub-county schools. Two reasons for that. One, those are the schools where we are able to expand capacity easily because most of them are day school. And so we can even put up tents and children will learn in those schools because they don't need boarding facilities, most of them. that will put an extra strain on the limited resources available. Secondly, most of these children are young and their parents want them to go back home. They don't want them to go to boarding schools. No one wants to put a 12-year-old on a bus from Kakamega to Alliance. They actually want their children to study and go back home. The fact that these sub-county schools are currently poorly resourced does not mean they should always be poorly resourced. Yeah?
Okay.
They can actually be resourced, and that is what we need to do. And I have said about government hiring the 58,000 teachers now and training them. I didn't say train the Form 4, the secondary school teachers or the primary school teachers who've been vigilant in KCPE and KCSE.
Yeah.
We have a window right now for the government to hire the teachers they say they want to hire,
Okay.
and take them to college and train, because they are currently pre-service.
Okay.
They are not in service.
But Dr. Manyasa, why is it important that the transition is done at grade 6 and not 7 or even 8?
That is a discussion that was had quite a bit during the development of this curriculum. And following research that showed a lot of children who drop out of school at age 12, 13. A decision was made to create this transition at that age to try and prevent the sentiments, some of them originating from cultures where boys go into initiation at that age and they feel they're too big for school now, to have a reason to see that they have gone into a new level and to continue to stay in school. So the thought of, because we'll still have implemented CBC in 844 system, so that the children still learn for 8 years in primary and go to secondary school. Those proposals were put on the table, they were looked at, and there was the idea that let us have children transition at age 12 to the next, to junior secondary. It is not a proposal that I myself quickly bought initially, because I thought we did not need to make secondary years longer, because overall that increases the cost of education. But I was persuaded that the risk of children dropping out at that age was much higher. And if we are interested in following the constitutional requirement of Kenya that basic education is a right, and that includes secondary, then we needed to find a way to keep children in school.
All right.
So there are challenges, and I don't want to say there are no challenges bedeviling the CBC implementation. There are challenges. And I wish that we could focus on those and focus on what are the solutions. Because the idea of let us stop, we have said since we started implementing, we haven't stopped. It is taking away our energies that we should be focusing on how do we address the challenges.
Okay. We're coming to the solutions in just a bit, because there's a lot of feedback coming through. We'll see if we can squeeze in some of them both on video and on WhatsApp, and also on Twitter coming through right after this break. We're still talking about the CBC. The task force still has about 11 days to take your views out there. We'd like to hear some of your views during this broadcast. All right? See you shortly.